Today we are talking about quite a hot topic, the new styles of temple garments that are rolling out throughout the world that will be available in the US towards the end of this year. I'm going to discuss why change happens in the church, how temple garments are related to modesty, whether or not you can wear them if you don't live in hot climates, and at the end, touch on the rise of garment-focused influencer accounts and how I feel about them. Welcome to Blonde Apologist. Hello, friends, and welcome to a new episode. Thanks for being here. I am excited for today's discussion. We are going to be talking about the new temple garments. And I did not think that there would be enough to discuss a whole episode on this topic. But then I put it on social media and I asked my listeners, what do you think? What are your thoughts, questions, concerns? And I have never received so many messages about a topic. So it's clear that people are thinking a lot about this, and there's actually a lot that we need to discuss. So whether you're excited or you have questions, maybe you have some concerns, maybe you're frustrated, I want to unpack it in today's episode. When I asked people on Instagram, like, what are your thoughts? I would say probably 70% of people were thrilled and about 30% had concerns and frustrations. And I think it's important to recognize both of those experiences. This has also been so controversial with people who have left our church online. And I don't feel the need to respond to the criticism necessarily, but I do think there's value in us talking and diving deep into it so that all of us know a better way to approach those conversations and even respond if you are in a situation where it's appropriate to talk about these things with someone. So let's get into it. I want to start with the obvious issue that is going on right now, and that is the overlap between modesty and the temple garments. In my original garment episode that I did last summer, I shared that garments are not to be a measurement for modesty, that they are not the standard for modesty, and I still stand by that claim. If anything, I feel validated in that claim because of these changes. But we do need to talk about the overlap of modesty and the garments because there is an important overlap, and I actually believe there's also a purpose with that overlap. If I asked you, what is the purpose for temple garments? A lot of you would say it's a reminder of our covenants. It represents Jesus Christ, and it's an outward expression of our inward commitment. And those are all true and powerful statements. But I think sometimes we forget that they were initially given to Adam and Eve to cover their nakedness. And that is a part of their purpose as well, to cover our nakedness. They were given as a reminder to Adam and Eve of the covenants. They were given as a promise to Adam and Eve. And they did those things as they do for us. But they also covered their nakedness so that they didn't feel shame anymore. And I just think sometimes we forget about that. And that's the aspect of modesty that is incorporated in the garment. They will always cover a significant part of our body because that's what they mean. That's why they were given to us. Now, in today's society, it's super common for people to look at any form of religious clothing and frame it as a means of control. In a world where we hear my body, my choice, it's easy to find convincing arguments that you alone should be and have complete authority over what you wear, especially the underwear you wear. But don't get caught up in that mindset. Your body is not actually your own. Your body was a gift given to you by your heavenly parents, created in their image. And as I honor my heavenly parents, I strive to make choices that also honor my body. And one of the ways that I personally do that is by wearing my temple garments. Now, let me be clear again that the temple garment is not the standard of modesty. There are many people who honor their bodies while wearing far less fabric than the garment provides. But for me, because I've made this covenant, they have a deeply personal meaning to me, and I've grown to love them, and I choose to wear them because I want to. And I think it's funny how so many people online want to tell me that I'm just being controlled, and I just look at them and say, this is what I want to wear. Sorry, I don't know what else to tell you other than they're important to me. And if you're curious on how I got here with my experience with the temple garments and also want to know more about my thoughts on our judgment culture in our faith, that is what the whole first garment episode was about. So you can go listen to that one if you haven't. But back to our conversation on modesty. Modesty will always be a principle of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is something that is important to our heavenly parents that they have asked us to live by. But because of the ugly history in our church of the way that modesty and purity culture influenced a lot of our lives, this is a really hard topic to discuss. But I want to get into how it was presented to us, how it was taught to us, and also the cultural influences that had. You guys know that I love distinguishing between the culture and the doctrine, but that's really hard for a lot of people to do because obviously the doctrine influences the culture. But what I learned from receiving so many hundreds of messages from all over the world is that how you're feeling about this change is heavily influenced by your upbringing and how modesty was taught to you growing up. And to me, that's just evidence that this is a culture issue because it is so vastly different between different regions and different households. So let's talk about those things. And I don't distinguish between the culture and the doctrine to excuse the church for bad culture. I think it's okay to talk about the culture and be like, hey, we screwed up here and we could be better. It's actually why I want to talk about these things. So I'm not excusing leaders or people who hurt you and taught this in a poor way. It's not excusable just because it was their interpretation. Their interpretation obviously came from what the church was teaching. And I think that the church, in an attempt to get away from this culture, is making these changes. Like, that's why these changes are happening right now. Also, this episode will be heavy with listener submissions because I got so many. So thanks for everyone who reached out and shared your thoughts on this. So starting with a listener submission, this woman said, I have mixed feelings about the change. I'm glad because they're finally listening and making changes, but more changes are needed. I'm angry because of the sexualization of shoulders over the years, leading to women in the church policing each other's bodies when it comes to garments. I'm sad that many women in the church have struggled with their bodies and self-worth, being told they somehow contribute to pornography and men's worthiness because garments have been made to be about modesty when they're actually about our covenants. This has also affected our young women who want to go through the temple as well. I wanted to start with this submission because I think it does a good job of summing up some of the major issues that people are having. She says that she's upset because of the sexualization of shoulders for so many years. So where does this come from? I'm sure you're all familiar that for many generations, how we dressed was outlined in strict rules in the For Strength of Youth. So reading from the For Strength of Youth that I grew up on, it says this: immodest clothing is any clothing that is tight, sheer, or revealing in any other manner. Young women should avoid short shorts and short skirts, shirts that do not cover their stomach, and clothing that does not cover the shoulders or is low cut in the front or the back. Young men should also maintain modesty in their appearance. So right there, clear as day, we were told to cover our shoulders. And I know that some people are feeling, to use the trendy term, gaslit by this change because for so long we were told to cover our shoulders and now the shoulders can be out and people are struggling with that transition. So let me try to explain what I think the church's intent was with this standard and how I think it got lost in transition. And when I say lost in transition, like, I don't mean to make light of your experience. I know from talking with so many of you that this teaching and the practice of modesty was used as this thing that created shame and guilt. And I think a lot of mothers, fathers, and church leaders used that line that I just read in the For Strength of Youth as justification to make you feel that way, to make you feel bad for the choices that you're making. When at the end of the day, I don't think it was ever about whether your shoulders were sexy or not. If I go back to the For the Strength of Youth in the dress and grooming that I was just reading, it says that your dress and appearance now will help you prepare for the time when you will go to the temple and make sacred covenants with God. I believe that is the whole intent behind these standards that were outlined. The reason why the For the Strength of Youth said cover your shoulders is because I believe it was trying to prepare us to be ready to wear garments. And at the time, garments were cap sleeve. So to help the young women be ready so that when they go through the temple, they have a wardrobe that already works with the garments, the church was like, hey, we advise you to start wearing stuff that covers your shoulder because one day you'll want to wear the garments and they will be that length. And now that the garment styles have changed, I'm not surprised that before this change happened, the For the Strength of Youth changed to take out the lines about covering our shoulders. I think a struggle that people have is seeing application change within the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're taught that the standards of the Lord do not change with the time and culture, and that is true. The standard here that we're discussing is modesty. Modesty is still an important standard. The practice and application of those standards, however, do change through revelation. It's the very reason why we need living prophets. And so I don't want this to be a stumbling block in your faith, because this has happened many, many times before. For example, the Lord has a standard for his disciples to do missionary work, to proclaim the gospel to the world. That is what we have been asked to do. Early missionary service in the church, like during Joseph Smith's time, looks completely different than it did now. Like when men were called at that time, they sometimes had to leave their families. They had indefinite lengths. Some of them served for multiple years. And in my lifetime, I've seen the service change from being able to go at ages 21 and 19 to ages 18 and 19. And it just looks very different. It's structured different. Or if we look at the standard to gather Zion, that's something we have been asked to do. We are commanded to do that by God. During Brigham Young's time, that commandment looked like people moving across the plains and getting to Utah. Nowadays, we're told to build Zion in the lands that we live in our home countries. And I guess I wonder if previous generations of the church would find these changes to be unfair. If some of those pioneers who lost their children and their families in trekking to Utah, I wonder if they hear and know that now we don't gather in Utah and have to live there, if they're like, well, that sucks because I had to do that and I lost my family. I don't think they say those things. I think that their experience was for their time and for their faith, and they were immensely blessed for the sacrifices that they made. Or those early missionaries, what if they saw us today and they're like pissed because they're like, oh, you get to go at 18 years old before you have a family and you only have to go for 2 years, and oh, you get a cell phone and you get to talk to your family? Like, do you think they'd be like, oh, this is so unfair? This must not be true. I think we need to be careful in criticizing changes. I think we need to be more open to them, because as we get closer to the second coming and the work hastens, the changes will be faster. I think they will be more abrupt. I think this is a small one. And it's okay if you saw this with a little bit of apprehension. I'm not saying that having questions and trying to figure out why behind stuff is bad. I actually think there's so much strength in doing that. A listener submitted, at first I was hesitant about the change, and I felt like the prophet and leadership was giving in to the people and what they want, but I prayed about it, and I feel so deeply that the Lord was willing to adjust the garment if it made it so more people could be comfortable wearing them. I feel stoked about it now, and it has made me think deeply about my garment and why the prophet, leaders, and the Lord want me to wear the garments. I love this submission, because what she did is she prayed about it. And a thought that's been coming back to my head as I've seen this conversation online is like, are we praying about it as much as we're talking about it? You're getting on social media, you're sharing your thoughts, your opinions, your criticisms, but are you talking to God about it and asking him why this happened? Because I promise you that he answers questions that we have, even with changes like this. And I love that listener's example. So we got some praying and we have some studying to do. And I think it's important to study modesty and understand it through God's eyes of what it's intended to mean, how it's supposed to be taught. The new for strength of youth is just evidence to me that the church sees that, hey, that approach was not working. It was being taken the wrong way. People were using it to be critical, to shame people, to judge others. And to get away from that, we're going to teach just the principle of modesty and let people decipher through the Spirit and govern for themselves what it looks like in their life. And I'm grateful for these changes. To me, it's obvious that the church is trying to get away from this culture. In some ways, I think that this change of the garments makes it harder for people to garment check, which I love. Let's get away from garment checking. Let's get away from that culture. Another listener shared, I doubt God is in heaven concerned with us showing 1 more inch of our shoulder. In fact, I think adding these styles will help all the members to remember not to judge. It isn't our issue if somebody is wearing garments or not. We should treat them with grace and kindness regardless. Ultimately, our one burden in life is to love others and love God. Another listener shared, I'm so excited. I think it will be a great opportunity to practice not judging others or constantly thinking if others are or aren't wearing their garments with their clothing. It will be a bit difficult for me to switch my mindset with showing my shoulders, but I'm open to it. To me, it's cool to see the open-mindedness and the acceptance of this change. But I know some people feel like it's not fair that this is happening now when earlier generations had to deal with the pain and the judgment of shoulders being sinful. And I guess what I want to say to you, if you feel that way, is the only way this culture gets better and we prevent those feelings and pains that you experienced on other generations is if we make this change. So this is a good change. I can see why you're frustrated and you feel like it's not fair. And you know what? Maybe it's not fair. But might I suggest that if you are struggling, maybe this change wasn't made for you. There are members who have been praying for a long time, and I know that this change is small, and I know that we need more changes to come in the future, and that this is a slow process, and that can be frustrating. But to so many, this has been a direct answer to their prayers. This listener shared, we live in Arizona and have lived in Georgia, and I've struggled with garments my whole life, not because I don't want to wear them, but I've suffered from UTIs and a kidney disease, and that haven't been the best for my health in these hot climates. I feel like this is an answer to personal prayers I've been praying for the last 24 years. This other person said, I feel like we in the U.S. are looking at it differently than the rest of the world. My son is in Ivory Coast, West Africa, on a mission, and he said that some members have them there. The ladies wear dresses all of the time, and the skirts are so helpful and cooler. He's hopeful to get his hands on some sleeveless tops because he has to hand wash all of his clothes, and he feels like it'll be easier to wash without the armpits and extra material. They're literally benefiting from it culturally and physically with the weather there. Sometimes there's so much higher of a reason the church changes things than we realize. These truly are blessing the people in West Africa. I really don't think that this was to make a statement on shoulders for the church. This happened because they're trying to make them more comfortable and more accessible to more members of the church who want to wear their garments. And what's cool about having living prophets, not all change in the church happens because it is needed for spiritual significance. Sometimes change happens just for the convenience of the time that we live in. And that's why we need living prophets. When I was looking into the evolution of garments, I came across a news article from 1923 when President Grant changed the temple garments from being like all the way to your ankles and your wrists to being the short ones. And this is part of the article that shares the explanation for why these change happens. It says, the change in style is permitted for various good reasons, chief among which are promotion of freedom of movement in the body and cleanliness. Formerly, the sleeves were long, reaching to the wrist. While doing housework, the women would roll up the sleeves. If the sleeves were being rolled up, they might as well just be made shorter. Encasing the lower limbs, the old-style garment reaches to the ankles and is looked upon by young members as baggy, uncomfortable, and ungainly. Permission is therefore granted by the First Presidency to shorten the lower garment. Also, buttons are permitted to take place of the tie string. Young men of the church, especially those who take exercise or play games at gymnasiums, favor the shorter garments. The permission granted is hailed by them as a most acceptable and progressive one. Altogether, and except for a few instances, the permission modification is welcomed as a sanitary move and a change looking to the comfort and the health of those who wear temple garments. So change can happen because of the convenience of the times that we live in. That doesn't have to be blasphemous to the things that we believe in this church. Funny enough, in this same article, there is a quote by a woman of the faith who was not favorable of these changes. And so I'm going to read that too, because Mormons will be Mormons. I feel like we're seeing a little bit of this today. It says, one good woman of long membership in the church, hearing of the change that has recently come about, remember this is 1923, went to the church offices and uttered this objection. I shall not alter my garments even if President Grant has ordered me to do so. My garments now are made as they were when I was married in the endowed house long before the temple was built. The pattern was revealed to the prophet Joseph Smith, and Brother Grant has no right to change it. The article goes on to say that explanation was made by the first presidency that they had merely issued permission to those who so desired to make the modifying change, that any member of the church who preferred to adhere to the original style was at perfect liberty to do so. And the same is true today. And I got a lot of those messages of people being like, I feel like I probably won't wear them, but I think they're cool and like great for other people who feel like they want to wear them. If you don't want to wear them, if you don't feel like it fits your standard of modesty, great, don't wear them. But you have no right and justification to be critical of other people who choose to. One of my listeners shared, women have always had to carry a certain weight about modesty that men don't usually have to go through. We go through a lot of persecution if we cross even a tiny line, and that's not fair. We are not what we wear. We have value no matter the clothes we wear. I think the changes are great because it shows that modesty is not always about your appearance. I also feel like they're hinting that modesty is so much more than what we wear. And I really, really love this message. And I think it's so true. And let's be so clear and make sure that we are not ever persecuting someone for crossing a line. And I received some messages that are like, it just feels like people are trying to push the line and get away with as much as they can. Guess what? That is not your problem. That is not something for you to comment about, to think about, or even worry about. This comes down to your covenant and your underwear, and you wear them the way that you want to. And we're done criticizing others for doing it differently than the way that we do. It's not fair that women have carried that weight in this church. And the thing that sucks about it is I do feel like it comes mostly from other women. I mean, I am familiar with the infamous general authority quotes about pornography and the way that women can influence that, and how we dress is a direct correlation to how men think. And I think that is an embarrassing part of our history. But I think the church has definitely learned to be better. And when we know better, we do better. And I think we've learned a better way to teach modesty, and you'll find it in the For Strength of Youth. So let's give some grace where grace is needed. When I did my modesty episode, I had a lot of older generation women message me and say this was so hard for me to listen to because I was that young women's leader who was critical of shoulders or was critical to girls and made comments like the ones you shared in the modesty episode. And I just hurt and I feel so bad. And I just responded to them and I was like, you were sharing what you knew best to share. Like you thought that that was the best approach to help those women to align their life with God's will. We know a better way now. And we're seeing these changes. And so let's embrace them and let's not go backwards or repeat history. For example, one of the judgments I already see circulating with this change is people wondering whether it's appropriate for certain members to be wearing them, dependent on the weather and the climate that they live in. So let me address that. I had a listener write in and say, I'm obviously excited but a little confused. I thought that they were declared as just being for people living in hot climates, so I'm wondering if I can justify wearing them. Just wondering if I should feel guilty about wearing them, if that makes sense. Haha. Okay, so I'm going to read the church's official statement when these were announced. This is from Church News. It says, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is providing redesigned options in styles and fabrics for sacred temple garments worn by members, including for those residing in hot, humid areas. So they say that these garments, this redesign, this style and fabric is being given an option for all temple wearing members. Period. It says that. And then it says, including those who live in hot climate areas. And I had a friend message me and she was like, I think that the reason why the narrative around the hot climate is being pushed so much is because I think it helps the Orthodox members of our church feel more comfortable with this change. And I completely agree with that sentiment. That's kind of what I was thinking as well, is like, I think our leadership knew that people were going to struggle with this change. And so they're kind of giving an excuse for this change and saying, this is how others will justify it. But in the statement, they made sure that it clearly says it isn't only for people who are in humid climates. It says it's included. They're included in this thought process, but it's for all members who wear garments. So, no, don't feel guilty if you're wearing them in a place where it's not super hot, okay? And don't judge people if they're wearing them where you think it's not hot enough for them to be wearing them. And I think this narrative is getting even more confused because people think that they're only being rolled out in hot climates first. And that's not necessarily true. They're just being rolled out in parts of the world first because of manufacturing and logistical issues. So that was a very common frustration that I got in my DMs, is like, why can't we have them right now? It's so frustrating. Well, this is a really big church organization, and a lot of people don't just buy one pair of underwear. They buy a lot of pair of underwear, and the church anticipates that. And so they have to be rolled out slowly, and that is not new for any garment rollout. Every time new styles come out, it happens slowly. Like, for example, in 2019, they announced the new nursing and maternity tops for women. And in an article that I read, it says the women's stretch cotton garment line is being extended to include maternity styles, nursing tops, and mid-calf bottoms. These new garment products are available immediately in the US and in Canada and will be available in all other parts of the year by April 2019, except for Brazil, where they will be available later in the year. So sorry, girlies, we got them first last time. Okay, the new styles, we were the first ones to get them, and this time we're going to be the last, and we can be patient, and we're not better than anyone else. So everyone needs to just calm down a little bit about that frustration. They're eventually going to get to us, and like being so frustrated about something that you didn't even know existed a few months ago is actually kind of comical to me. Okay, the next thing that I need to address, a lot of people are thinking that the few American influencers who have them were sent them by the church, and they were not. I have confirmed that these individuals knew someone in one of the countries where they are available and were able to get them that way. They aren't getting early access because the church is sending them like PR or something for the new garment line. That would be so funny and weird. That's not what's happening. So let's just clear that up real quick. But I did have a listener share this. I'm honestly really conflicted because these influencer videos about the new garments are pretty helpful for understanding what they will look like. But it also feels, I don't know, weird that these girls have the new garments and are showing that off to everyone else when they won't be available in the States for like a minimum of 6 more months. It's also odd how somehow several got them from overseas and started posting at the same time. It's creating this internet hype over something that is sacred, which feels kind of icky to me. And honestly, I don't know how I feel about it either. I think that it can be helpful to show what they're going to look like, but like the consistent and constant posting them in our faces also feels kind of strange to me. And I think it feels strange because these accounts feel like their purpose is to just find what works with garments, like to find the line. And you know what? I don't have an account. I don't have a fashion account. So maybe I would feel the need to post this kind of content if I did. I'm kind of stumbling over my words because I'm not critical of these women. I think that they have every right to be sharing these things. I did get a message from someone that I don't think the modification to our sacred garment should be displayed and discussed on social media platforms for the world to critique and criticize. I don't agree with that statement. Yes, garments are sacred. I get it. I feel that in my life. There are a lot of sacred aspects about our faith that we publicly talk about. Even the church itself has made content around the temple garments and posted them on public social media accounts. I also don't think that it's fair to just let the critics, the ex-LDS members, post content about them and not share our perspective. I think that is one of the reasons we have social media and we're being called to share the gospel online is because I think we can correct some of the misconceptions. So let me be clear. I don't think that these women are in the wrong for sharing this kind of content. I just hope that the purpose and the meaning behind the garments isn't lost on the frequency of posting about clothes that work with them. But honestly, like if you see those posts and it frustrates you, just don't follow them. Like they're created for certain people. And I think that it's really beneficial for people who haven't quite found their style with wearing garments or struggle to find things that work. Those accounts are so beneficial for them and good on them for posting. If that isn't you, that doesn't include you, don't follow them. You don't need to. And there's enough negativity about our faith online that I'm just grateful for any positivity that is about my faith. I had another listener share with me. She says, our church gets slammed enough in the media, so I don't really know why members are adding to it by hating on people who have the new garments. Since when are my covenants anyone else's business? And yeah, I just ditto. I agree with her. I think that it makes us look bad if we are critical of these people, especially publicly in their comment sections. There is so much criticism already out there. Let's just be on a team. Let's just cheer each other on. So I want to end this episode by going back and talking about Adam and Eve. After they partook of the fruit, Adam and Eve became very aware of their nakedness. And Satan wanted them to feel shameful for being naked. And so in their hustle, they tried to cover themselves with fig leaves and they tried to hide from the Lord. And the Lord told them to come out of hiding and to come unto him and that he would clothe them. And he clothed them in the first garments. And I find it merciful for Heavenly Father to give them this reminder that they had a Savior coming that would make up for the transgression that they just created, but also to prevent them from feeling shame in their nakedness. He covered them. And it's interesting how what was once given to us to prevent feeling shame is now a tool that so many use to create shame in our church, in our culture. And I think in some ways Satan is winning because we let that happen in our faith. Ezra Taft Benson taught, Satan is increasingly striving to destroy our understanding of the most fundamental truths, especially concerning our divine nature, our covenants, and our purpose in God's plan. End quote. Satan is clever. He takes the most beautiful truths and he twists them so that we can't recognize them for what they are. How many of us have felt feelings of shame, guilt, unworthiness because of the way we dress, because of the way that we wear our garments or don't wear our garments? I'm sure every one of us have felt those feelings before. That is not their intent. That is not why our heavenly parents gave them to us, so that they have a way to control us and to make us feel more guilty for not doing something right, or the way that we perceive it to be right. And these changes to me are just evidence that they want them to be more accessible, more comfortable, and more of a blessing. And so if there are changes that can be made, they're going to be made. And I know there are more changes to come. And waiting for change and accepting change definitely requires faith and patience. But Elder Oaks taught, many changes in the church and in our lives come in the Lord's time and in the Lord's way. Sometimes we may struggle to understand, but as we exercise faith, we see that His plan is always unfolding for our good. This is one of those things that is for our good, and I am just grateful that we know that the heavens aren't closed and that there is ongoing restoration and revelation to come. What a time to be alive. Well, I hope that this episode has been beneficial for you in some way. I love you guys. Thanks so much for being here, and let's chat more about it on social media. Bye.